unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, welcome back to another incredible Researchers on a Mission, ROAM radio show. As, of course, we always bring to you an incredible show, and today is an extra special show because we do have one of my favorite guests of all time, someone who is a true journalist, a true author, and someone who really does their homework, goes out there in the field and finds the facts and looks at them from both sides of the view and gets to a conclusion. And with that being said, just before I introduce him, of course, I'm Dr. J, hosting the show with my co-host live in London, Mr. Johnny Webb. Johnny, it's a pleasure to have you live in London.
Hey, good evening, Dr. J. How you doing, guys? And Jim.
I'm doing great. I was just going to say, I was just going to introduce the person I was speaking so highly about, and that is the one and only Jim Mars. Mr. Mars, like Johnny said, howdy to you. Howdy to everybody. That's right. It is honestly a pleasure to have you. This has been a long time coming. I know originally I was trying to get you in November so we could do it around the time of JFK's assassination anniversary. You were unavailable, but this is a perfect time because now you are going to be coming to speak to the Conscious Life Expo at Los Angeles, February 7th through the 9th. And, of course, everybody has a chance to see Mr. Mars there, as well as other people, other lectures, Richard Dolan, Nick Pope, but I definitely recommend seeing Mr. Mars. And near the end of the show, you will all be getting a preview of what Mr. Mars will be presenting there. But now, I figure we will start at what is a long time coming, something honestly I've been planning since August when we were talking about this in person at Contact in the Desert. And that is exactly what I just said, JFK. Because Mr. Mars is really, if not the world expert on the assassination, one of, and to me, I want to say the world expert because he has appeared on countless television shows, has been investigating this for exactly 40 plus years right now, 1975 to 2015, if not earlier. And of course, he was there, lives in Texas, and it was a traumatic experience. But that being said, Mr. Mars, I recently saw, I think I told you this in person, a documentary which opened my eyes further to things that I never knew, and that was Dark Legacy, and it did a very good job on presenting things to facts to the viewers for them to decide. Things that we'll get into, such as a lawsuit. I'm going to leave that unnamed for the moment till we get to that point. Handlers, and of course, a recent president from the last 20 years that was involved, and Oswald having government connections, and so on and so forth. So with that being said, I don't even know where to begin. I guess let me begin with this. The name, E. Howard Hunt. Tell us, and the listeners, of course, what does that name mean to you?
Well, E. Howard Hunt was a very colorful and interesting character. He was a CIA officer. He was also one of the Watergate burglars. In fact, he was in charge of the Watergate burglars. He was mixed up in every bit of skullduggery probably that has happened over the past almost century. He was involved with the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was involved in the Kennedy assassination. He was involved with, as I say, all the way up to Watergate. He blackmailed President Richard Nixon, said if he didn't get $2 million, he might reveal the whole Bay of Pigs thing. Well, everybody knew what the Bay of Pigs was. That was history. They tried to invade at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, and they lost, and we all understood that. We also, it was well known, well documented, that Richard Nixon, as vice president to Dwight Eisenhower in 1959 and 1960, was the political action officer who authorized the Bay of Pigs invasion. John Kennedy did not, when he got elected in the fall of 1960, he did not realize the extent of what they had planned until after he had been elected. And then he was met with a fait accompli. You know, they said, Mr. President, this has already been approved by the previous administration. He said, well, all right. He said, but hey, keep it real low profile. We don't want the world to know that we're invading another country. And of course, right off the bat, the whole world realized that this was us invading Cuba, because even though they used these Cuban volunteers, the freedom fighters as they were called, nevertheless, they were using military equipment that could only have been provided by the U.S. military. Plus, the U.S. military was standing close by, waiting to move in and regain the island of Cuba. But at the last minute, there was not a second airstrike, and some of Castro's planes remained intact, and they were able to go out and damage the two ships that were bringing the invaders in, the Barbara and the Houston. Does that sound familiar to people aware of George Herbert Walker Bush and his Zapata drilling company, and an oil man with a wife named Barbara operating out of Houston, Texas? In fact, there is a CIA document showing that a George Bush of the CIA was contacted the day after the Kennedy assassination to find out the reaction of the anti-Castro Cuban community. So we see all this mixed up in there all along. But and Hunt was a integral part of all of that, working with the anti-Castro Cubans. On his deathbed, he told his son, St. John Hunt, that he had been involved, although he said he did not take place or did not participate in the Kennedy assassination. But he did name various CIA people that were involved, such as Card Meyer, whose wife Mary Meyer had become a close friend of John Kennedy's and was found murdered a few months after the Kennedy assassination. And so here was a tie-in with the CIA. Another aspect of that was the fact that some years later, a note surfaced in the handwriting of Lee Harvey Oswald addressed to Dear Mr. Hunt. Okay, and it didn't really say anything specific, but it said, before any further actions taken, I would like clarification, of what's planned. Lee, Dear Mr. Hunt, signed Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, the key here is that at the time that note surfaced, a lot of people, researchers, thought he might have been referring to the right-wing Texas oil millionaire H.L. Hunt in Dallas. But the note itself actually surfaced out of Mexico. And and then it turns out that E. Howard Hunt had been acting station chief in Mexico City in the months preceding the assassination. So here's another tenuous link to E. Howard Hunt. Now, what you're referring to as a lawsuit came some years ago when a news magazine in the story accusing Hunt of being part of the assassination team in Dallas. And he sued the newspaper, excuse me, and there was a court trial in Florida. And I think Mark Lane, the famous JFK researcher, participated in that. And the upshot was the jury ruled against Hunt and said that they had, indicating they had reason to believe from all the evidence that he may indeed have been participating in the Kennedy assassination. His main defense was that he couldn't have been in Dallas that weekend because he was at home with his family. But to me, his son, St. John Hunt, personally told me that no, he was not home with his family that weekend. So based on all of that, that leaves the very real possibility that Hunt was one of those who participated in the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Absolutely, and I'm glad there's a few things you brought up that I was on my plate list of to ask you and comment on, such as Bush, George W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, the senior, for that fact, who had a habit of naming ships and other things after his wife, Barbara. That was one thing I wanted to comment on. We'll get to it.
By the way, the code name for the Bay of Pigs invasion was Operation Zapruder. And his oil company was Zapruder Drilling.
Yeah, so obviously this goes to show that Herbert Walker Bush did not really, I think, very carefully when using code names, because what's good does it do naming your ships after your wife or a secret CIA plot for Cuba based on your business name? I mean, didn't he think of the ties, or did he really think he was above the law for that?
I think he thought he was above everything because his father, Prescott Bush, was one of those powerful senators that helped create the CIA. So the Bush family has been in bed with the CIA since its very inception.
And, of course, everybody knows as a fact that before he became vice president under Ronald Reagan, he was the director of the CIA, for that matter. So, like you said, they have been in...
Yeah, that's when I first became aware, was like the mid-'70s, where all of a sudden they reached down to this Texas oil man and put him in the head of the CIA. And I'm going, wait a minute, that just doesn't happen. You know, what is with this? And that's when I began to look into it, and I found out that, you know, his connection, both through his father and then from himself, with the CIA was long-standing and goes all the way back to the inception of that agency. Furthermore, I am still in touch with a former black operations CIA pilot, Tosh Plumley, who, in fact, on the morning of the Kennedy assassination, flew some people into Dallas from Florida, from stops in Florida and New Orleans, and including the mafia mobster Johnny Roselli. And he had been flying for the CIA for a number of years, including both before and after Castro took over in Cuba. And then he was flying arms and ammunition to the Bay of Pigs invaders. And I know way back in the 80s, I guess, or maybe in the 70s, well, I guess it was 80s because I didn't meet him until 80. But he told me that he was flying arms and ammunition for the Bay of Pigs invaders. And I said, oh, yeah. And he said they were using oil companies as fronts for moving this ammunition and these arms. And I said, oh yeah, maybe like George Bush's oil company out of Houston, you know, and knowing that I was throwing him a trick question. And he, without hesitating, he said, no, this was Zapata Drilling out of Midland, Odessa, which was exactly what George Bush's oil company was prior to his moving to Houston. See, when he was president, everybody in the country kind of understood he was an oil man from Houston, Texas. But at the time of the Bay of Pigs, it was Zapata Drilling, and he was out of Midland, Odessa. So that tells me that Tosh Plumley was telling me the truth. And so, in other words, George Herbert Walker Bush was intimately involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion.
And as we'll further tell, intimately involved in JFK. Now, I'm going to go on to the Zapruder film for a second, because obviously that's the world's most famous footage of what happened to JFK that fateful day. It's been shown in virtually every documentary ever made, as well as even in the movie JFK by Oliver Stone. But when you look at the film and the claims of Oswald hitting with the deadly bullet that finally took out the portion of the president's head, by them saying that the bullet came from behind, well, just using common sense, every time I watch the footage, knowing the position of the Dallas Book Depository or repository, it doesn't you don't need a genius to see that the way JFK's head bounces backwards, the blow clearly is coming from the front or the side of the front, but not from the back.
Correct.
And so I don't understand where they use that in the Warren Commission to basically, as the qualifier, to say, well, no, this clearly shows the bullet coming from the back. And I just never understood that. And then, of course...
Well, Let me explain that to you, okay? Two things. Number one, nobody, including the Warren Commission, got to see the film run as a film until about 15 years after the assassination. Time Life bought it and kept it sequestered. The Warren Commission published some still frames, and then transposed the frames that shows his head being obviously thrown to the left rear to where it kind of appeared it went forward. Interestingly enough, when Life magazine finally ran some still photographs from the Zapruder film, they too transposed the exact same frames and said it was a mistake. Well, it wasn't a mistake. So it was a cover-up. Okay, so number one, most people, including the Warren Commission, never got to actually see that film as you've seen it for 15 years. Number two, the film has been altered. The film, before it was even turned over to Time Life on the Monday following the Friday assassination, was sent to the National Photographic Interpretation Center of the CIA, a secret, highly technological facility in New York called the Hawkeye plant. And now that's beyond dispute, because not only do we have mention of the same type of copies that were made there, but we have the testimony of some of the people at this CIA facility who admitted they worked on it that weekend, and we have some still storyboards that have now been produced by the Assassination Records Review Board that was done that weekend. And in my latest edition of Crossfire, I have 11 Hollywood videotape and film experts who all said that the frame 314, which shows apparently the back of his head intact, has actually been a crude forgery with the back of his head painted on, so it doesn't become clear that he was shot from the right front and it blew out the right rear portion of his head.
And furthermore, and this is what really got me, and I had no idea this even existed. Right after he was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead, and there was a press conference with the doctors that basically declared the president had passed away, without knowing anything that was going on, without knowing about the chase for Oswald, without knowing the Zapruder film even existed, they straight up said that the bullet entry wound was at the right temple, or right near the right temple / forehead. And so, and obviously that's something that you never saw again until it resurfaced in his documentaries, except for the people who saw it live. And so for me, that just solidified exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, now you get into the crux of the case. There were crimes committed at the level of the federal government. And these crimes include fabrication of evidence, suppression of evidence, alteration of evidence, suppression of evidence, and intimidation of witnesses. Now, if you and I were to commit these crimes in connection with a capital murder case, we would be legally considered accessories after the fact. And that means we're considered under the law as guilty as the person who pulls the trigger. In fact, here in Texas, we've executed people in murder cases who the facts show did not kill anybody, but they were there. They knew about it. They drove the car, or they provided the gun, or they got rid of the evidence, and they were accessories after the fact, and they've been executed for murder because they're considered just as guilty as the person who pulls the trigger. So in the case of the Kennedy assassination, the two accessories after the fact who can be said to be guilty are his successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and his next-door neighbor and old buddy, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Now, can I prove that those two men ordered or even orchestrated the Kennedy assassination? No, I can't. But what I can prove, beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt, is that both those men took steps to block any meaningful, truthful investigation into the assassination, which makes them accessories after the fact.
Exactly. Accomplice liability extends, just as you said, and this is in common law through all 50 states, and most states have adopted within their own judicial system statutes, basically laws, essentially adopting the common law system, which says exactly what you said, which is that an accomplice, whether before the fact or specifically after the fact, which is worse than before the fact because you don't really know what they're going to do, that they have to essentially share the guilt of the person because they could have had an opportunity to stop it, prevent it, or better yet, turn that person in. Same thing with conspiracy. Before we go to LBJ and, of course, Hoover, because I definitely got questions on there, I wanted to throw this into the mix, too. Speaking of alteration of evidence, what about the fact that the casket that was loaded on Air Force One was different than what was offloaded, and the body itself of our president, of our poor dead president, John F. Kennedy, looked like it had been altered, meaning that it seemed like there was some surgery, amateur surgery done on board the plane to cover up the wound on his forehead.
That's true. That was for the top of the head. And, I think you're referring to the Siebert O'Neill, the two FBI agents who were present at the autopsy, and they, based on overhearing what the doctors were saying in the report, said there appeared to be surgery to the top of the head. Well, there was no surgery to the head in Dallas, so that had to take place sometime between Dallas and the time that the body was received at Bethesda. But the one that I think clearly illustrates wound changing on the body is the throat wound, because in Dallas everyone saw this little quarter of an inch puncture hole in his neck at about the level of the Adam's apple, and everyone who saw it said this was an entrance wound. He was shot from the front in the neck. Now, one of the doctors, in an attempt to facilitate a tracheal tube to get air to him, took a sharp instrument like a scalpel and enlarged that quarter-inch hole with a half-inch slit so they could put the tracheal tube down in there. But now, if you've ever cut your finger on a piece of paper, and it hurts like mad, but when you pinch the skin together, you can't even tell there was a wound there. Well, this was the same thing. They made a little slit there. And then after they removed the tracheal tube, the wound closed back up and was the same quarter-inch hole that had been in the first place. In fact, the doctor who did all this called that wound inviolate. It had not been dilated. And yet, when the body was received at Bethesda and the three military doctors performed their autopsy, that quarter-inch hole had become a 3-inch wide gaping gash, so big that they didn't even know that was a bullet wound. They thought it was just a very unusual gaping gash to facilitate the tracheal tube, and they had already shipped the body off for burial when they suddenly were in touch with some people in Dallas and found out that there had been a hole in his neck. He'd been shot in the neck, and they had to go back and revise their autopsy note. So this clearly shows that somebody had manipulated and altered that throat wound as well as the head wound. And of course, the purpose for all of that was to obscure the fact that he had been shot from the front, because the official story was he had only been shot by Oswald, who was to his rear.
Hi, Jim. It's Johnny Webb in London, and I just wanted to ask you one of the questions there, what you just said. I once saw a video footage. It was a reconstruction, obviously, but it was from a story that was being told that, in fact, the main shot that came from the front that makes it look like his head goes back and to the left came from just in front on the road in a drain hole. That the story was that a man was in a drain hole and nobody noticed that he wasn't showing on the road because he was set back in a drain hole on the right-hand side just in front of the limousine. Mm-hmm. And then was able to escape back out through that manhole system and disappear behind that grassy knoll, I believe. Have you heard or seen about this story?
I have myself stood in that storm drain. And I'm kind of a short guy. I could actually stand up in there and look right out the little storm drain slit there. It's like a slit in a bunker, okay? And that place is someone standing in that storm drain, and with Kennedy sitting at the right side of the limousine, that places him no more than about 6 feet away as the limousine got parallel to the storm drain. And there is some tantalizing evidence. People who said one of the shots sounded very like an echo, like it was in a hollow place, a cave or, something. I even had some women tell me they had been there and had seen a shot from that sewer. But there was never any investigation. And so the idea that there was a shot from the storm drain remains speculation. But I think the point is that at this point, it shouldn't really matter how many shots came from the depository, how many shots came from the Daltex building, the county courts building, the grassy knoll, from the storm drain to the south side of Dealey Plaza. The point is there was more than one gunman, which by definition means there was a conspiracy. This conspiracy has been covered up at the highest level of the federal government of the United States of America, which turns what at that time legally was simply another Texas homicide into a national coup d'etat.
Exactly, and this is why such a high population of citizens in America don't believe what the government has told us regarding his assassination and the Warren Commission's findings. And what's even crazier, but not necessarily crazier, it's just a fact, and it makes total sense. People living outside the U.S., the percentage of them believing that the Warren Commission, what their findings were false, is even higher than that of the United States citizens. And currently, the United States citizens, I don't know the exact percentage, but it is well over 50%, probably closer to 75%, if not more.
Some of the latest polls show it's as high as 85%.
I would not doubt it one bit, because the more people that are opening up their eyes, more of this evidence that's coming forward from experts such as yourself. And one more thing I want to add. I've seen you recently. It must have been, I don't know if it was recorded in the last couple of years, but it aired again as a rerun. I don't remember the television show, and you were on it. It was about JFK, and it ran, of course, in November during the anniversary. And you spoke to somebody who was, I don't know, it was a station or where he was on a second floor, and he saw smoke coming from where the suspect was allegedly at the grassy knoll, which indicated that obviously they heard a shot and they looked and they saw smoke rising. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, let me just say this. If this was any other case other than the Kennedy assassination, and I told you that, number one, the majority of witnesses in that particular area said that a shot came from behind a picket fence on a grassy knoll area, and that there was 2 sets of acoustical scientists who testified that at least one shot came from behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll, and that there's even a photograph, a blow-up, that clearly shows a person with some kind of weapon firing behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll. And I try to tell you there was nobody back there. You'd think I was an idiot. But this is the Kennedy assassination. And even though we have all this evidence, there's still people who will say, oh, no, there was nobody back there. And why? Because the federal government told them there was nobody back there.
I noticed that there was another documentary that I saw recently, and it was about the curator of the depository building, the actual room that's, supposedly the shot's taken from. And the curator was let the guy back, and he went and looked at the actual window that was supposedly the window and where he looked out, and he said, obviously with trees and obviously time there would be more foliage and stuff, but he said that there's no way that he could have taken the shot from that angle, from where it was.
No, you can't.
And obviously, if he'd looked out of that window and then looked left and down, to just round the corner on the left side, the building opposite, that's where they say Mr. Bush was standing.
Right. The thing about the window is that they have the Dallas Historical Society, made up of little old ladies in tennis shoes, who are the daughters and wives of the rich Dallasites, who most of whom hated Kennedy and were perfectly okay with the fact that he got killed. In fact, some of them, according to some sources, were even involved. They have set up the Sixth Floor Museum and have closed off that whole section in plexiglass so that you can't even get to the window looking out there. The window was only about half open, and it was only about less than a foot off the floor. To be able to get a shot off from the extreme left of that window so you can angle towards the right, down towards Elm Street, would require somebody to get down in a kneeling or prone position. And there are two 2-inch metal pipes to the left of the window, which would impede your line of sight. The main thing is that where the first shots were fired, there's an overhead sign today. It was not there in 1963, but that's where the first shots landed. And even though you can't get to that window today, you can be very careful, watch the traffic, step out into the middle of the street where the presidential limousine was, and look back at that sixth-floor window, and what you're going to find is you can't see it because there is a cottonwood tree in the intervening. And the thing is, that tree has been cut back several times. I know in the late 70s it was trimmed back for a TV movie called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, and then again it was cut back in the early 90s for the Oliver Stone movie. So again, this Texas tree was in full leaf and is in essentially the same configuration today as it was in 1963, and you can't get a line of sight from the sixth-floor window to that point in the street today, and you couldn't in 1963. In fact, common sense would tell you, if you know anything about guns or hunting or shooting, if you're in that sixth-floor window, your shot is when Kennedy had turned from Main Street north onto Houston Street and is coming straight at you and presents an open and reasonably stationary target, not waiting until he turns below you and then moves behind the trees going laterally downhill away from you. Okay, that's a much more difficult shot. But the difference is by placing him down into the plaza, as was the case, this allows for a triangulation of fire. You can have a minimum of 3 assassins, and they have opportunity to all concentrate their fire on that one particular zone by waiting until he's down halfway down Elm Street.
Another thing that I noticed, Jim, was on a documentary, was that just as the airport were leaving with the parade and the president was in the back, that a guy walks up to the presidential limo and talks to one of the passengers, I think it was, at the back of the thing, and they argue and puts his hands up into the air as if to say, well, what the hell? Yeah. And they sort of walk away, so there's sort of less security for him at that point. You know, what do you make of that yourself, Jim?
That's a case of pulling the normal security away from the president. There was not only that. See, normally there was a handheld, there was a footrest and a hand grip on both sides of the rear of the presidential limousine, and traditionally and usually there were Secret Service agents hanging on there. Well, see, that would have presented an obstacle to anybody trying to fire into the car from behind. And so at Love Field, these agents were ordered away from the car. And as you said, that one of them more than once throws his arms up in the air like, what? Why am I not able to do my job? Okay, and that was not the only instance of violation of security measures. There was, according to Secret Service regulations, you are supposed to get rid of anyone on top of overpasses under which the president might travel. And yet when he went under the triple underpass there at the west end of Dealey Plaza, there were 14 or 15 railroad workers and a couple of cops and who knows who else up on that overpass. And most of those people said that they distinctly heard a shot from off to their left, which would have been the picket fence on the grassy knoll. It's all pretty common sense, and it's all pretty easily explainable once you understand that the government has lied to us about what happened.
Repeatedly at that. And just as you said, the Secret Service being pulled off and the fact that no one should be on overpasses, same thing with windows. No Secret Service agent would ever allow windows to be open where a sniper could be, and yet there were several windows open, specifically in the Texas Book Repository. And that just baffles me.
That's true. In fact, but let me tell you something. What you may not be aware of is that that was actually the second motorcade of that day. Earlier that morning, when Kennedy arose and spent the night at the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth, and then went downstairs and met with a crowd of people, even though it was kind of drizzling, and then had a breakfast sponsored by the Fourth Chamber of Commerce, and then rode in a motorcade from downtown Fort Worth out along the West Freeway to Carswell Air Force Base, where they boarded Air Force One for the little short hop over to Dallas. I had a friend of mine who was working for a TV station that overlooked the West Freeway. And he told me years ago how the Secret Service came in there and chased everybody away from the windows overlooking the West Freeway, ordered them to close the windows, and not allow anybody to have an open window overlooking that motorcade route. This is standard, normal, tight security, okay? And yet when you got to Dallas, all the way down Main Street, down Harwood, down and into Dealey Plaza, and as you mentioned, the Texas School Book Depository, there's windows open, people hanging out all over the place. This, again, is a clue to what actually happened. There was not one lone nut, because the lone nut possibly could have gotten off a shot at the president, but he could not have stripped the president of his normal security. Only somebody with high authority can do that.
And exactly, and then that let's go into those high authorities, because exactly what I feared would happen, as I was telling you before we went on, because we only had an hour. We are getting to a little over 20 minutes left, and I want to save the last few minutes to talk about your Conscious Life Expo. But there are a few figures that we definitely need to touch on. You mentioned LBJ. I would love to hear, because he was obviously someone who had the authority to pull Secret Service off. Same with the CIA. And of course, Jack Ruby, also known as Rubenstein. What I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, was that he was also CIA, whereas Oswald was one of Hoover's boys. Is all this? Am I correct on that, or do I got those facts?
No, I think you're pretty correct. Most researchers, especially up until recently, have concentrated on Jack Ruby's connections to organized crime. And there were some, okay, but what they failed to realize was he was also heavily involved in gun running, which put him into working with people within the CIA. And Oswald, yes, he, in addition to probably being initially recruited by the Office of Naval Intelligence while he was in the Marines, he was probably passed along to the CIA, particularly since he had been involved with being a radar operator for the then super secret U-2 spy plane operations being run by the CIA, while he was a radar operator at Sugi, Japan. But then at the time of the assassination, Texas authorities told the Warren Commission that they had information that he was making extra money working for the FBI as a paid informant, and he was making about $200 a month. Now, if you go study the Warren Commission, you find that they had several people, including some Western Union employees and including some store owners, who testified to them that they recalled Oswald coming in and cashing checks for about $179. And it was the same amount in all of these accounts. The one thing that if you've ever worked for the federal government of the United States, you realize is that one thing that they're a big stickler on is you got to pay your taxes. And so if he was making $200 a month at that time, if they were taking out withholding and all the usual taxes, then that means his take home would probably be about $179. And yet the Warren Commission, their rationale was, since he was not known to be making any of this extra money, then all these people who said they were cashing his checks, they were just wrong. But now the thing that Mike could actually prove it one way or another would be to study Lee Harvey Oswald's income tax records. But hey, guess what? They've been hidden away and they are still not available.
And definitely not the first time with a conspiracy involving the United States government. This is off topic, but the same thing with Roswell. All the records from the months before that July incident from 47 and after just miraculously disappeared. So I do not find...
Same thing with the Branch Davidian front door from the Waco disaster. You know, that in courtroom testimony, it was testified that the Texas Rangers had gotten the front door of the Branch Davidian home, and then later turned it over to the FBI, and the FBI says, no, we don't have that. We don't know where it is. And of course, that front door, forensic experts could study it to determine how many shots went in, how many shots came out, and probably could determine who fired first. In the case of the Waco tragedy, if the government people were fired upon first, then they were defending themselves and had every right to take all that murderous fire that they dished out towards the end. But if it could be determined that the federal agents fired first, then by historical context and by our law, people have a right to defend themselves, and the federal government was totally wrong in that whole operation. But of course, the key piece of evidence is missing.
Go figure. Of course, I wouldn't be surprised if some vault exists deep in either CIA archives or some military base where all these crucial pieces of evidence from everything, from JFK, from Waco, from Roswell, and others are just sitting and away from public view, and they could always just claim that we don't know where it is, as they always have.
That's right. They're all stuck in some government warehouse right along with the Ark of the Covenant.
That's right.
Remember that scene in Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones, that's right. Raiders of the Lost Ark at the very end. He's just bringing it. Top men are working on it, and like he puts it in a crate, like you said, giant warehouse full of these crates of top secret stuff. Anyhow, back to...
Well, that does lead actually into what you wanted to talk about my latest book, Our Occulted History, because there's a whole section in there about how the Smithsonian Institution is guilty of hiding away all kinds of anomalies and all kinds of strange artifacts that could probably tell us and reveal a lot about the genesis and the evolution of the human species. And what a lot of people don't understand, because everybody knows the Smithsonian is this world-respected, museum of science, which is true, but what they don't know is that ever since the late 1800s, it's been a branch of the United States government. So
I've always imagined it, Jim, like at the end of Tomb Raider when they want to put something in the vault and all of a sudden it gets wheeled into this massive vault and you can see all these crates from antiquities.
And that's the end of that.
Yeah, that's what I think is Smithsonian.
Exactly. That's exactly right. In fact, but let me point out that my book, Our Occulted History, when I use the term occulted, this is not a book about devil worship or witches or vampires or zombies or anything we usually think of as occult. I'm using it in the astronomical sense. When the moon eclipses the sun, that's called an occultation. It occults the sun. It hides or masks the sun. So our occulted history refers to our hidden history that is basically kept from us by the authorities, by the school systems, by academia, all right? And why is that? Why can't we find out the truth about our heritage? Because if we come to a truthful understanding of the human race, who we are, where we came from, we'll have a better understanding of what's happening to us now and where we're heading. And the people who are trying to run the world don't want that. okay? They want us dumb and numb and just incapable of thinking for ourselves. So what am I talking about? Okay.
Georgia Guidestones. You know, I think about when I look at that.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty much sums up what they want to do.
A few years ago, I traveled in Egypt, and I was particularly interested in looking at the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid because I wanted to see for myself. And sure enough, there's quite obviously deep water erosion, vertical water erosion on both the Sphinx, around the Sphinx, and on the Great Pyramid. Now, geologists then would tell you that means those two structures sat out under very heavy rains for a very long time. And yet the same geologist will tell you that there has not been significant rainfall on the Giza Plateau for more than 10,000 years. Okay? So what's the significance of that? That means the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid, at least, were both in existence and sitting out there more than 10,000 years ago, which leaves out the Egyptians. The Egyptian civilization only began about 5,000 years ago. So, see, what we think we know, we don't know.
And like you said, it's being kept from us, from those in the power, for some reason that they think they're better than us, that they should know the truth, and they should disseminate what we deserve to know or what we should know, because for some reason they think we might flip out, or for whatever reason. And that's the sad part. And that's why I'm very grateful for researchers and journalists such as yourself and authors of such amazing books, which really guide us to the truth. And going to what you said, again, like you said, first, when I heard wind erosion, that's a Sphinx, I just thought that was crazy. And then, of course, you think, well, why would some civilization build their community in a really arid place? How could you grow your crops? How could you sustain anybody there? You can't. It would have to be a very lush environment. And that's why so whenever they said exactly what you were saying, that there hasn't been substantial rain in 10,000 years, it just didn't make any sense to me.
Until you understand that 10,000 years ago, that area of land was quite fertile.
Yes.
And it was totally different from the way it is today. For example, I traveled in Israel, and so much of Israel is just this parched desert. And yet, back in the ancient days, even in biblical times, they referred to cedar forest, and they referred to these areas that were obviously quite lush and quite productive. So it's over the centuries, the environment has changed. Now, in the course of, say, Palestine, for example, I know, if you go back and study the Old Testament, you find that there were wars and more wars and counter wars and revolutions, and various empires rose and fell, which means that over thousands of years, armies moved back and forth through Palestine, and they cut down all the trees for firewood and for weapons of war and for defenses. And so pretty soon they denuded the whole place. But it wasn't always like that.
And like you said, it was a lush and fertile environment, which is exactly why they settled there.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, when I was in school, we were more or less taught that the Egyptian civilization was probably the world's first greatest civilization, And yet, after I did my research for our occulted history, I find that actually it was simply a hand-me-down civilization from even greater civilizations such as the Babylonians or the Assyrian or the Phoenician, and all of those can be traced back to what appears to be the first true great civilization, which was that of Sumer, S-U-M-E-R, and Sumer comprised the area in Mesopotamia, which we now know as Iraq. And it was located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In fact, it was known as under the name Eden, E-D-I-N, which apparently got translated into E-D-E-N in the Old Testament. And it begins to tell us the story, the true story of the development of the human race.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because obviously several people and several researchers that I've spoken to over the last few years on these airwaves have spoken to the fact that we were created by an off-world species. Eric von Däniken, of course, being one of them, Georgios Tsoukalos, and so many more. And evidence to me is really starting to lead up to the fact that if you look at the Sumerian scriptures, such as Zechariah Sitchin did and translated, basically that's what they say. And
well, but let me clarify something here, because I don't want people to go out and start trying to tell people that that the human race was created by aliens, okay? Because it's not specifically true. According to the ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets, which predate the Bible by thousands of years. And
you're talking about Enki and the Anunnaki, yeah?
Yeah, you're right. And they tell us about the Anunnaki, which translates as those who came from the heavens, landed on the earth. And this fits in with legends all around the world. The ancient Chinese, the Mayans, the Aztecs, Dogon tribe in Africa, others who say that these beings from other worlds came here and taught them civilization and language and farming and all kinds of things, okay? But
and
what
the good book teaches that, they were the fallen angels, doesn't they?
Yeah. Well, you could, that's just a question of interpretation, how you want to view them. If you and I and Dr. J are walking through the woods and a little diminutive green guy runs across our path, you might say, oh, I just saw an alien, and Dr. J says, no, I saw a demon. And I may say, I saw a leprechaun, but the reality's still there. And what the Sumerian tablets tell us is that they did not create humans. All they did was take Earth primitives and genetically modify them. They enhanced the breed, just like they improved the breed, just like we do with cattle and sheep and dogs and cats. So they didn't actually create us, but they did improve the breed. And how they do that? Well, they took an Earth primitive, shall we call him Mr. Neanderthal, and they tweaked with his DNA, and they created Homo sapiens, modern man.
And that's exactly what I believe. I should have been more clarified more. Exactly. I've led from all the evidence that I've read from researchers such as yourself and the others that I mentioned, that what you said, Earth had these primates. I don't know if it was Neanderthal that was manipulated with some other DNA to create Homo sapien, but exactly like you said, we were upgraded essentially. And one other thing which you definitely know, and I want to ask you this, is all these different civilizations, whether it goes South America, even here the American Indians, as you mentioned, Sumer, all these regions, even in the Holy Bible, there are references to beings coming from the heavens above. And like you said, whether one of us calls it a leprechaun, another calls it an alien, another calls it a demon, still, when they're coming down from the heavens above in flaming shields or chariots of fire, and
Genesis 6:4.
Yeah, and Genesis 1. Of course, there's Ezekiel for the Bible, and then in South America specifically too, all of them talk about getting wisdom from the star people. And they're not connected. So there was no way that these people could have had any communication from the other side of the globe when they didn't really have the means to cross the Atlantic or any other thing for that matter, any other body of water, giant body of water. They didn't even know anything existed on the other side of that body of water. But yet they all have common elements.
Exactly.
There is a point in the Bible that I remembered, and if maybe Jim would know this as well, but there's a point where Jesus, I believe, might have been in the understanding of being Emmanuel. So I think it may have been the First Testament, but between the books, there was a statement that said, I was with the Lord when he made the Pleiades and the Orions. And so that statement sort of stood out for me that, all things come from the Lord in a sense, if we say source, if we don't want to go religious and stuff.
Right. Johnny, interestingly enough, in the Sumerian tablets, it says that the Council of the Anunnaki, when it was proposed that they create a worker race, there were big ethical arguments, and they were saying the same thing we hear today about in vitro fertilization and gene splicing and cloning they were saying it's not up to us to play God. You know, we can't create things. And so it's interesting because in arguing that, they were implying that they too believed in a universal creative force, a God, if you will. But it wasn't them. You know, they were just doing scientific stuff. They were just ahead of us in their knowledge of genetics and reproduction. And
it reminds me, like going what you just said there about how the banking system works and the illusion of gold and the promise to pay the bearer the sum of. And how we're all actually slaves. So I think, you know, the mining story of that, of mining, you know, human hybrids to go and mine planets for gold, it's, you know, if you can understand the pun of it, you know?
Yeah, I do. In fact, you hit a sore spot here because I'm just right now at the point where I have to pay my local taxes, okay? And it suddenly reminds me that even if I pay up my mortgage and pay up my house and pay up my property, I still don't own anything because if I don't pay that taxes, the government can come and take it away from me. So I don't own anything. I'm just a serf, a tenant, you know, that's paying money to the government every year so I can keep living where I am.
We only have a few more minutes left, and we definitely are going to do this again. And every time we speak, we always run out of time. Your new book, Our Occulted History, is very relevant for several reasons. A, it talks about, as you mentioned, our true origins, the fact that it's been hidden from us, and you correct what the misconception is of the word occult. And as you mentioned earlier, several people just assume witches, sorcery, Satanism, all that stuff, but yet even Jordan Maxwell, same thing when he came on air not too long ago, essentially corrected people from the misconceptions on that. And I wanted to give this last few minutes to, although we basically covered a small portion, a very small tidbit, because we can literally go on each of these topics for hours, but if you can give in a few minutes, what other preview for anybody to get them excited, because I know I'm excited to see you again and to see your lectures, as every one of them blows me away, that they're going to see when they come to Los Angeles to see you at the Conscious Life Expo on February 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Well, we're going to talk about all of this stuff that we've just discussed, but we'll go into more detail, and I have illustrations to show you what I'm talking about. And we're going to learn all kinds of things. The basic purpose of our occulted history was to take two seemingly unconnected topics and show that they may very well connect. One of those being the recently popular idea of ancient astronauts, okay? The History Channel with their Ancient Astronauts program has raised the consciousness and raised the interest among the general population over the idea of ancient astronauts, space people who came to this planet eons ago and did all kinds of things. The evidence for that is, at the very least, compelling. I would say almost overwhelming when you really take everything into account, particularly the evidence of non-natural artifacts on the moon, on Mars, and perhaps on other planets and other moons of our own solar system. And then we go to the other topic, which is really pretty unarguable, which is the idea that there is a small handful of super rich people who tend to think of themselves as the cream of the crop, who are trying to run the world. And they are known by various names, the New World Order, the Illuminati, the Council of 12, the Committee of 300, there's all kinds of names for them, but the evidence for the fact that there is a relative handful of people trying to run this world is really pretty undeniable. Now, my premise was that can the two be connected? And yes, they can. It's really incredible. The Rothschilds, who head up probably the world's greatest banking system, and can be found behind all kinds of things going back for several centuries. They themselves claim to be the descendants of Nimrod, an Anunnaki god king to be found in the legends of Mesopotamia. Also, we find that of all our recent presidents, particularly the Bushes, the Clintons, even Al Gore, and even Barack Hussein Obama, they are all related, and they're all related and go back to the royals of England and the royalty of Europe. And so we find that, yes, there's a direct line from the ancient astronauts through the control mechanisms of religion and finance right up to the present day.
And as you said, there's so many names associated with them. Edgar Mitchell, who I recently spoke to, and of course Paul Hellyer, who comes on regularly. They also even refer to them as the Cabal. But again, like you said, this encompasses everything. Mr. Jim Marrs, it has always been it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you, and it always is. Each time you enlighten me with so much more information. I just want to have one last thing for you before you go. If you could tell the audience one final message, what would it be? And then finally, leave it with where people can find you, your website, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Well, my admonition is don't trust me. I'm not a politician or a preacher, so I'm not asking for anybody's trust or belief. But listen to what I have to say, and then study it for yourself. And at that point, it won't be a question of belief. You'll know for yourself what's real, what's not, what's truthful, what's not, and start thinking for yourself. We get whipsawed all the time by the media and trying to tell us how to think. Well, let's think for ourselves, because God gave us that computer up in our heads known as our brain. And it's kind of like a parachute. It works better when it's open. So start thinking for yourselves about things, and then you can go and visit my website at Jim Marrs, that's Mars with 2 R's, Jim Marrs, M-A-R-R-S, at the .com, okay, JimMarrs.com. And you'll see various articles that I've posted that that you're probably not going to read in the mainstream media, and you can find my books and videos. So there you go.
You all heard it from a true journalist, someone that I really, truly respect, and as I said, always opens up my eyes, weighs both sides of evidence, and presents you with facts. It's been a great show, everybody. Stay tuned. Hour 2 with Paula Harris. We are back, hour 2, with a super special guest, one of the most amazing women in ufology, someone who I really look up to, and someone who is truly making a big impact in showing people that there's not just the bad abductions that are going on, but showing people that there's actual good contacts, and each and every one of you out there is capable of having your own positive contacts, meditations, going into your consciousness. Everybody out there really needs to start paying attention to this. And this person, who is, I'd love to consider her a dear friend, is Paula Harris. Ms. Harris, welcome back.
Thanks so much, John. I appreciate your having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. And just for everybody out there, as you know, she has been a longtime journalist, a researcher, someone who really is not an armchair researcher, a real researcher, someone who goes out to the field, speaks to people, gathers evidence, and comes back. She's currently always going to South America because that is where a lot of these positive contacts are happening. And she grew up in Italy, and as a matter of fact, something we'll get into a little later, Antonio Urzi, someone who's been making a lot of waves for the positive contacts he's been having, and he's actually going to be speaking at her event, which we'll get to a little bit later. But for now, let's just remind everybody who's been listening that Paula Harris is going to be speaking at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, February 7th, 8th, and 9th. And with that being said, Paula, let's just give people a little bit of a taste of what you're going to be presenting there.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do is I'm going to speak about the research. I think I called it Back to the Future, that was done in the United States in the 1950s with the original contacts of Giant Rock with George Van Tassel, Howard Menger in New Jersey, and George Adamski, because those documents, those books, and the people that are still around to actually have witnessed this talk to us about a contact with human-type aliens, with people. You know, that George Van Tassel, the man walked in when he was at Giant Rock. I don't know if people know George Van Tassel worked for Lockheed Martin. He leased an airstrip in Southern California. And this man walks in and says, "Do you want to come out and look at my ship?" This is 1954. From that point, George Van Tassel became a contactee. He went on radio. We have forgotten these people, and he was also inspired to create the Integratron as a time machine and rejuvenation chamber. Now, that was financed by Howard Hughes, so this was pretty powerful stuff back in the 1950s. And then Menger, when Howard Menger had his contacts in New Jersey, there's photographs of them. There's photographs of Val Thor sitting in his backyard. There's all this that was part of a Wendell Stevens archive. So I started studying that. I started studying Adamski and talked to Glenn Steckling, to the Adamski Foundation, Daniel Fry, all the people that met people. So, you know, as a researcher, I'm going, how come all we see as a stereotypical UFO, either whether it's on Facebook or conference posters, is a gray? If people are coming here, how come we're looking at grays all the time? So from that point, I went to study the South American contactees, Sixto Paz, who will be at the Consciousness Life Expo. By the way, Sixto Paz was one of the biggest contactees in South America. I will be interviewing him myself on Saturday, who meets with these human-type aliens even today, and he brings journalists with him. So, I mean, it's happening in South America with Ricardo Gonzalez and his contact with Antaral, with Luis Fernando, whom I'm going to bring to Laughlin next year, with all of these people who meet with men, and, you know, these people that are coming off the ships. So, and to make a long story short, my conference will be talking about, my lecture will be talking about these human-type people.
Now, at your event in this past November 2014 in Laughlin, Back to the Future, was a truly remarkable event, and you had a lot of powerful players there. Stephen Bassett, who's leading the disclosure, which a petition's currently up right now. And of course, I remember the panel on Giant Rock, George Van Tassel. What's new to me, actually, is I didn't know Howard Hughes funded him. I knew of the Integratron. I had a chance to go see it. I hear from everybody that when you go in, you could actually feel it in the air, but sadly, when I was there, it was closed. But I do recall Howard Menger also being mentioned, as well as him having contacts. John Lear, as a matter of fact, spoke about him. But let's talk about Ricardo Gonzalez, because when he spoke in Laughlin, he really was truly amazing. And the fact that he took you down and to South America, if I was not mistaken, I don't know if it was South America or
the contact was at Mount Shasta.
Shasta.
Yeah, it was Mount Shasta. Every year at Mount Shasta, he has a group of people in meditation, and last year he said that his contact Antaral, whose name is Antaral, invited me to be there. So he said, "You got to be there," and It was hard, though, John. I mean, it was 3 days of camping in Mount Shasta. It was fasting. I did not know I was going to have any kind of contact. It was an amazing contact with a 10-foot-tall being in the forest at Mount Shasta. It's on my website for people that want to know the details. And the being who spoke a very strange language, because he kept speaking constantly, in the middle of his talking, repeated to me, I mean, I know I heard this, he said, "Thank you." So that changed my life. It made my life go upside down because I don't usually deal with contact. And so from that point on, I realized that whoever is visiting has a definite message of a human consciousness and evolution of the human person in order to have a dialogue with these people. So, that's basically my focus. If the people want to know what I'm doing, I'm going all over the world talking to people about, it's not so much positive or negative contact, it's what is the message they're giving us. And the message is, grow up, wake up. You don't want to come together over a big tragedy like what we had in France. So everybody's fighting with everybody in the name of religion, and everybody is not looking to the stars, and everybody is not understanding we're all one, and we're all human beings, we're all mothers with children. So these are messages that are coming from the stars, from the cosmos. And John, that is the message of the contacts today in Latin America.
I definitely would have to agree with what they're saying. We need to stop this primitive tribal warfare, stop this fighting amongst each other. And as Ronald Reagan said twice, which I know you know this, everybody recalls this very famous statement. He said, if we were faced with an alien threat, wouldn't we all come together and forget our petty little differences? Now, whether or not we have a threat or not, we need to do exactly what he said. Forget our petty little differences and remember that we're all human beings. And we share this planet as one. It doesn't matter if you live over the Atlantic Ocean, here in America. It doesn't make a difference. We're all human beings. And we all need to strive to get to the next level. And just like as these extraterrestrials are saying, we need to wake up and get past these differences and move forward so we can save our planet, one. And two, join this galactic community that's been waiting for us to go. Now, I know we talked about what happened in Mount Shasta with Antarel on another show prior to the Laughlin Conference 2014, but we didn't have a chance to do it on this network, and I'm hoping you can give the viewers, the listeners, a little quick background about what Ricardo did when he invited you there, saying that Antarel wanted you to be there. And I remember you said you were a little hesitant, or not hesitant was the word, maybe a little nervous when he said, are you ready to go into the forest? And I was hoping you could tell everybody briefly what took place from there on that led to the ultimate hearing the thank you from this 10-foot being.
Well, let me tell the audience, first of all, I'm on my way to Argentina to a peace meditation of 1,800 people who are camping. Now, you got to imagine that in your mind. And all these people are going to be saying mantras and prayers for peace for 3 days. And we're at the bottom of a sacred mountain called Campillo del Monte in Córdoba in Argentina. And Ricardo's invited me there, too. But when he invited me to Shasta, that's what he does. I mean, once a year they go and they meditate for peace, and you sit there. It was out of my comfort zone in that at my age now I'm not real comfortable with sleeping in a one-man tent on top of a mountain with no comforts, like no bathrooms or whatever, but there were like outdoor porta potties, but it was difficult. And I didn't go there to meet Antarel. I went there for the peace meditation because I didn't understand. I don't think I really understood what was going on. I thought it was going to be like I've done with Stephen Greer. People must know that I was a consultant on the movie Sirius, so I was out outside under the Milky Way for 6 nights with Stephen and saw all kinds of craft, and it's in the movie Sirius. I thought that's what was going to happen, so I'm out there and I'm doing the meditation with all these people, none of them of whom speak English. They're all speaking Spanish. And then all at once, out of the clear blue sky, at 8:30, 2 UFOs flew over our heads. And I was used to that because, you know, I was out with Stephen and saw craft. Stephen is amazing. He calls the craft in, and they come. But so these 2 UFOs come over Mount Shasta, and I didn't know it, but that was the signal to Ricardo that Antarel was going to appear. So I didn't know that. I was just sitting there seeing the UFOs. And then about 11 o'clock at night, he walks over to me, and he says, "Can you handle this? Can you handle, we have to go in the forest. That's where he's going to be." And I was terrified. There was no moon. We couldn't use flashlights. I had to walk in the dark. And if people study this, like I hope you go to my website, Paula Harris, PaolaHarris, .com, and you read the 13-page report. I had to wait until when I got down there until this mist came up, which is called a Zendra, and that mist, when you stand in that area, and in South America they have it. I mean, Sixto Paz goes through a Zendra too. It's a portal. That's when you have contact, and I saw the mist come up from under the ground. I went there. I was very respectful. I stood still. I didn't move, and that's the kind of contact it was. It was very. In fact, I didn't really know what to do because the being was there. I saw his shadow and heard him talk, but Ricardo's girlfriend, who has been with him for 4 years, had never seen him, and she saw him as clearly as day, and she was walking up to touch him when Ricardo hollered at her not to go any further. He told her, don't touch him, because the thing is that, you know, there's protocols with contact, and you don't just go up and hug a 10-foot tall person that's standing there. So, you know, it was amazing. I must say, though, when I wrote about it, John, all I said is when you get the opportunity and it's a positive situation, all you need to do is say yes. So you say yes, and then you take your chances, and it's exhilarating.
One thing I really want to add, and you brought up a very good point, 2 things. That the meditations, first of all, they're a very, very integral part of opening up your consciousness. Dr. Greer has clearly been advocating this a long time. Grant Cameron has recently, over the last couple of years, switched away from presidential UFOs and White House UFOs to really talk about consciousness and spend a lot of his effort there. And I'm really glad a lot of people are realizing this. Same thing with Colin Andrews. But Dr. Greer clearly has been doing this for a long time, teaching people CE5 protocols, close encounters of the 5th kind, where it's human-initiated contact. And again, with the meditation, you were saying, well, we don't need what's happening in France to wake us up. We don't need any more violence and terrorism. But when people get together and meditate, just like you said, it's hard to fathom the amount of people that are going to be camping. But the peace that's going to come from them is very exponential because of the Maharishi effect. And for those out there who don't know about the Maharishi effect, if you were to put numbers, and these are just random numbers I'm going to create, if one person is meditating, then you're putting 1 unit of meditation power out there. If 10 people are meditating, I'm just making up numbers. It's exponential, so it'd be like equivalent to 100 people. If you have 1,800 people meditating on the same thing, such as peace, the amount of power that meditation is going to cause is really exponential. There was a study done in Washington, D.C., where a large group of people, I think it was in the thousands, you might have known about this study, and I think it was written in Stan Romanek's book, if I'm not mistaken, as well as other places. What they did was, for a 7-day period, several I think it was maybe up to 5,000 people or 3,000 people in that range were meditating for peace. That week, the city crime in Washington, D.C. was at record lows, which went to prove that the Maharishi effect clearly works. So when we get this many people together to meditate on something positive, it's pretty endless of what we can achieve. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and you know, I love the example you used. I know that example too. But another one is that when Edgar Mitchell went to the moon, he did ESP experiments from the moon down to Florida, and they worked. So if you can imagine that he is projecting something from the moon that they're picking up in Florida, you can imagine what the speed of thought is. You know, the power of thought, of love. I mean, you have to add love in there. I mean, the power of all of that. And he was a technician. So Edgar Mitchell worked in quantum physics. You know ions. You know his noetic sciences. He's proved that the power of thought is incredible. And this meditation, you got to understand that they're going to be out there camping for 3 days. They don't go home and have a couple of beers, watch a game, and go meditate. What they are is in 24-hour mode of changing their consciousness because they have no access to the outside world. These people are probably going to fast, which means you don't eat for 3 days, and you're in another altered state, and also you sleep under the stars. You don't have all that electricity and EM and those electrical anomalies you have when you're in a house or next to telephone poles. It's very hard. I'm not going to do the camping part because I can't do it again. But I will be there day and night with these people in that kind of atmosphere. If enough people believe that worked and enough people did it, it would change something on the planet.
I'm really glad you brought up Edgar Mitchell because I actually just recently interviewed him again, and not to talk about bases on the moon or anything like that, but specifically to talk about his foundation, noeticsciences.org. And I asked him, what made you start looking into consciousness and expanding that and finding a foundation? And he basically went on to describe what you just said, what he did on the moon, the ESP experiment, but more so on his way back from the moon, he had an awakening of some sort. And that's when he realized the importance of consciousness to the point of finding this foundation to teach everyone out there. And like I said earlier, I'm glad everyone is finally starting to pick up on this because this is exactly what we've needed. And if you can tell anybody out there what it is that they need to be doing so they can expand their consciousness, because we can tell them to meditate, but again, I think that's a generic if we just say just that. Can you tell people a little more specifically what they should be doing? I mean, for instance, gathering groups together and leading a meditation on peace for maybe what's happening in France, or how would you give instructions to people on opening up their minds and their awareness and raising their consciousness?
Well, one of the things I think you notice, John, is, this isn't about ETs. This is not about outer space, even though we're studying this. It's about inner space. I mean, if you're not nice to your neighbor next door, and if you're yelling at people, and if you have anger issues, nothing's going to ever happen. It's got to be that you have to be peaceful inside yourself. You have to say, look, my life is short. I'm not here for nothing. Let my life count for something. And you start with yourself, and you start with being peaceful with your family, with your husband, with your wife, with your kids, with your family. And then you go out and you try to look at everybody else as just an extension of you. It's very hard to do. It's taken me, years, 50 years, to even understand this, because I wasn't even brought up like this. This is not the Italian family structure where we're very volatile, everybody just sort of emotes. What you have to do is you have to become peaceful inside. Then Stephen Greer is amazing, because when he does the protocols, he does the puja ceremony, but then he says to them, if you feel like it, we're here and we're peaceful inside, so we won't make any judgments, whoever you are out there. And they just show up. I mean, they go, okay, this is a nice situation here. We'll show up, and they won't do anything to us. But one of the reasons that we don't have the human-type aliens visiting anymore, and I was listening to the Boyd Bushman interview, you know, I mean, that went all over the net, is because, and he even said that, the only thing we're interested in is the technology. And we don't care who's dead inside after we shoot them down or they crash. I mean, we just let them go. They're like, you know, creatures, they say, and you know, and we're interested in how it works. Now, since when? I mean, this is not a way that you know, cosmic beings are going to want to visit this planet. So all we care about is how the craft flies. You know, or not only that, they have to play tricks for us. You know. You, in other words, show up, do 3 circles, and then I'll believe you. So we have to change the way we think.
Exactly. We definitely have to change the way we think, because if just that example that you said, if all we care about their craft, why would they want to come visit us if we're going to purposely just shoot them down so we can get their technology? And that's selfishness to the T, literally. And again, that just goes to show how primitive we are in that way of thinking. And that's what I'm going to transition this to something positive. You're doing something that I really, really admire. The events you put on are really revolutionary, because you're opening the minds of people to a new side of things. Just like you said, it's not just all about the grays and abductions. There are ETs out there that want to make willful, positive contact to teach us to wake up, as we said earlier. There's human-looking extraterrestrials. Like you said, George Adamski talked about them. Howard Menger talks about them. You got to meet one through Ricardo Gonzalez. Antonio Urzi. That is someone who I've been watching for the last couple years. I think he's a phenomenal person. And now in 2015, November, at your next event, UFOs, Technology, and Consciousness, you have an amazing array of speakers. And I'm hoping, even though we have several months, actually a lot of the year before that, I think it's going to be one of the best, if not the best, conferences of the year, for the fact that you have so many different people speaking on so many amazing topics. Now, I would love to go through some of these speakers, but let's go ahead and start with Antonio Urzi. Let's tell us, the listeners, your history with him and why you decided to bring him. I know, but I want them to know.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to state that they could go to StarWorksUSA.com for the lineup of next year's November conference in Laughlin. It's November 13, 14, and 15. But in order to bring top names, especially foreigners over here, I had to do it a year in advance. And Antonio and Simona, I've known them for at least 12 years. When I lived in Italy, I saw Antonio Urzi's first film footage. For some reason, this guy is able to film UFOs from his attic, from the attic of his house in Milano. And so he's in this apartment, and what happens, I'm convinced it's his wife, Simona, who is the contactee, because she said she feels it, so he runs to the window, and they get this incredible film footage of UFOs, and it's not night, lights. It's a Dempsey-type craft with the 3 balls underneath, the three little balls underneath, or it's very weird shape-shifting plasma craft, or it's, any given night on a weekend especially, he can go out there and they're there, and they do it on purpose, because what I think happens with Antonio is people need to see to believe, and he's got so many movies and so much film footage. It's amazing, and both of them are beautiful people. Now, it's hard to bring foreigners over here because in their case, it's 2 people, and I'm going to end up interpreting for them. For the Spanish, I have to get an interpreter for them, but these are the people that are having contact, and his film footage, and I'm going to put more on my Facebook of his film footage, is amazing, and I think all that sightings are wake-up calls. They're just saying, guess what, we're here. I don't think that, in the case of Antonio and Simona, I think sometimes, and this happened with Dr. Strange's, you have to put it in a box. So in their case, they're heavily, they're heavily into the Madonna and Christ and so forth. So they put it into the Christian box. They're putting it into the rationalization that maybe, this is a key time in history, because it's very difficult to have this kind of experience and not have any box to put it in. But what that does is diminish, it kind of makes it an interpretation that you don't really know who's up there and you don't know why they're here. So it's very interesting, their point of view on the context they have. But what I wanted to tell you, too, is our panels are the greatest ones of all. And for the people that saw Interstellar, that blew me out of the water, we're having a panel on Interstellar in November with Jim Peniston and Nick Pope and Chase Klutsky and other people. I'm bringing back some of the people from last year to talk about the possibility of time travel, because there's a box you can't really touch. I mean, that is such a hard concept. But Interstellar, what that said, and more people should be talking about this, is that who's up there is us from the future that's inhabited other planets that's coming back to warn us.
And that movie really hit the nail on the head. I thought it was really fascinating. I don't want to make any spoilers out there, but it's crucial to note that there's a point in the movie when Matthew McConaughey realizes that he may not come back, and he's starting to see visions. He hits a different dimension, and he sees that time is now a spatial dimension. So he's in the fifth dimension, or per se, where instead of having our normal 4 dimensions, there's actually 5. And he's viewing his daughter throughout the different years, and then he starts to make contact with her, and that's when he becomes has the realization that it wasn't extraterrestrials that really led them there, led Matthew McConaughey to find NASA in the movie and to find the black hole, which they apparently brought, but it was humans from the future. And that's exactly what Jim Peniston says occurred at Rendlesham. He said the craft there was not, what he believes was not extraterrestrials per se, but us in the future. And I'm hoping you can tell people a little bit about that, since you brought this amazing panel together. And I think it's a first of its kind. I don't think Chase Klutsky has ever spoken with Nick Pope and Jim Peniston on such a panel. And this is truly going to be one of its first kind, because since Peniston deciphered the binary code a few years ago, he hasn't made as many appearances as many people would think to speak about this. So the fact that you got him to come to your event is one thing, but the fact that he's on a panel is even better. And like you said, one thing that differentiates your events from others is a lot of people have panels, but the selection you use to put the panelists together and the topics are what really stand out more than others. Let's talk a little bit about the Peniston and the time travel. What do you think of what his statements were, that the craft that visited Rendlesham over those 2 nights in December 1980 was in fact us in the future versus extraterrestrials?
Well, John, they were on a panel together in Chicago. I had a conference in Chicago only on flight aviation problems. In other words, the fact that UFOs interfere with flight. There was the Chicago incident and so forth. So because Jim lived in Chicago, he came just to watch. I mean, he trusts me, so he said, look, let me just come over and watch. And then I put him on the panel, and everybody talked about the fact that UFOs are important also because of the lack of briefing of pilots and astronauts and so forth, which, if you want to go into that part of UFO disclosure, that's very important. But Interstellar presents us with an anomaly, because Interstellar is giving us the hypothesis that all contact is us from the future. And I know that talking to Jim, because he's a military man. Now, remember I told you about the box. He has to put it in that box. That's the box that he's trained in. He's trained in the fact that no other culture out there, cosmic culture of any kind, could have technology of that kind that could come back. And in that case, it wasn't on vacation. They did shine a light on the nuclear storage area. I mean, they're telling you, I mean, in their subtle way, hey, don't use these things. You guys aren't going to be around very much longer. You've got nuclear weapons here in England, and of course the British didn't know that until the UFOs kind of ratted out the American base there at Woodbridge. The thing is that Jim Peniston thinks all contact is us from the future, and that gets a little tricky. And I love the panel because everybody can say what they feel like saying, and there is no right or wrong. Everybody is going to just talk about it. And you realize that even in my own field, I've never seen any of the researchers talk about interstellar, and I'm going, where is everybody? I mean, aren't they paying attention to the media? Interstellar, we could have a whole show on interstellar. These things that come out, whether it be a Spielberg movie or what's happening somewhere else, the fact that Jaime Maussan is showing only film from Syria, Ukraine, and Russia means that we should be paying attention to what's happening all over the world. Anyway, what do I think? I think that, yes, it's all of the above. It's us from the future, but the little creature at Virginia in Brazil was not us from the future. It doesn't look like us from the future. And some of the gray population is not us from the future. I think the J-Rod, who told Dan Burr she was us from the future, could be a mutation of us on another timeline if we self-destructed, because he was pretty human-like. But I think that there are just too many species. I mean, I think we're being visited by all kinds of species, and maybe one of the species is us from the future.
I would definitely have to agree with you there. Clifford Stone, even when he left the military in '89, said that we had cataloged over 50, or the military had cataloged over 57 different or 58 different species that have visited us. And I'm pretty sure that tally has gone up even more higher today. And I think you're definitely right. Dan Burrish talked about J-Rod being from us having a catastrophe, living underground for several tens of thousands of years, and then moving on to the moon, then Mars, and then Zeta Reticula, and then coming back here 54,000 years from now is in a different timeline, assuming that that's what we go through if we have that catastrophe. But the whole point is to avoid us having such a catastrophe. And as you mentioned, Jaime Maussan, another dear friend and someone who is really such an amazing journalist, and I love being around him because everywhere you go with him, even people who aren't paying attention to ufology, they just really want to come up and take a picture with him because they recognize him from Latin-speaking television. He is truly an award-winning journalist. He hosted 60 Minutes and currently hosts 24 Hours on top of his dedicated UFO show, Tercera Milenio, also known as Third Millennium. But as you mentioned, the fact that he's showing videos of what's happening in Syria, Ukraine, proves to me, again, that these extraterrestrials are very worried about us. And when they outed the United States in Rendlesham by going to where the nuclear weapons were, this is the same pattern that they've been repeating, like they did with Captain Solace and shut down the nuclear missiles, ICBMs, in Malmstrom Air Force Base in '67. What are they trying to do? They are trying to send us a message that we need to stop playing with fire and move past this. Now, you mentioned Jaime Maussan. He is absolutely a great person, as I mentioned, that's going to be speaking there. Jan Harzan, I see, is also on the list. And we said off air, and I see his picture right here, Michael Lindenman. He was a very well-known figure in the 90s, maybe even the late 80s, and he sort of stepped down, but you're bringing him back to light. What are you going to get him to speak to?
Well, both Michael and Deborah Lindemann, they're both working into hypnotherapy, but Michael Lindemann is talking about the evolution of human consciousness. Now, he's really into it and has studied this. And we agree on one thing, unless we all grow up and we understand, our humanity, our souls, our consciousness, nobody is ever going to speak to any cosmic cultures. So he basically is going to talk about consciousness studies and what he's learned and a little bit about reincarnation and about your consciousness being in your body, but more your consciousness living on after you die. And so I've heard him speak because he was just on Gaiam television, and he will be on, people will see him in June, because I'm trying to have him, he's so articulate, he's so good, he could be a newsman. I'm trying to have him come forth and tell the general public all the wonderful positive messages about discovering who you really are. And he's going to be talking about this in Laughlin in November. May I add also that you can sign up for Laughlin now in November, because we already have 15 people signed up, and the vendors are signing up, and we're doing it in advance. There is no, I already have these people. We're talking, we're preparing it. It's not something that's thrown together. It's very well planned. And the theme is very well planned. We're having Adam Curry there. I want the young people to understand. Adam Curry is working with Dean Radin. Adam Curry is developing an app on consciousness. He's working on quantum physics. He's very young, and he's kind of going to be the key, because I want more young people to get involved in this, because they have to carry the banner and put the UFO phenomenon, the visitations, and everything in the right context. This is the awakening of humanity. This is like major. It's not fear-based. It's education-based. And that's exactly what the Laughlin conferences are going to become, because these people that are speaking there have a background and are all on the same page as far as going in the same direction of educating.
I'm glad you mentioned Adam Curry. I had a chance to interview him in person when he came to the Sirius premiere event in Los Angeles, and that was my first chance. And it was ironic, because I didn't know who he was when I initially was introduced to him. Then I see the screening of the film, and I'm like, aha, I recognize that face. I just met him an hour and a half ago. And then sure enough, at the after party, I approached him, and then I pulled him aside and put him on camera for a few minutes just to speak about it. But like you said, it's the young people are the future of the generation. And right now, this is what's so important. Everybody who's 22 years or younger has been in school, or at least in kindergarten, and are now taught that the Kepler telescope is finding habitable planets. So this means that the percentage of young people that believe and are open to the fact that we've been visited for years and will continue to be visited is very high when compared to the rest of the population. The children are our future. And the fact that you have a young scientist such as Adam Curry dedicated to this is extremely important. And I want to mention briefly, can you tell people what he's going to be speaking about? And then I want to go to a very important topic, which is you making it a point to not very many women are involved in this, and yet there are, but they're not given as much opportunities as the men involved. But you're making it a very big effort to have these women come on, and I was hoping we could talk about them after Adam Curry.
Well, the thing is that you have to have balance. This is not about feminism or anything. You have to have proper balance. And when I came back to the United States, because I was a journalist in Italy for 15 years. I came back in 2007. I had done a lot of work with the former Minister of Defense. I'd done Colonel Philip Corso. Most of my books, and I have 5 books, are interviews with military and intelligence people. So I've done the nuts and bolts stuff. I've done that. But it's very difficult in a very closed, I don't know what to call it, archaic kind of situation where the same people are speaking at the same conferences, and it's the same icons to break into that. And I found myself with all these new stories and no place to put them. And also, I found myself sharing a lot of my work with other women. And so I said to myself, if I ever can do it, and I started with an all-women conference in Glen Rose, Texas. And the reason why I did that in 2012 was to herald, Angela Joyner, who did the Stephenville case. My God, she lost her job over that. And she should be like a hero, because this is a woman that brought forth the Stephenville case. It was on Larry King Live, and her newspaper fired her. So I gave her an award, and it was Carol Rosin and Lisa Romanak and Carol and Angela Joyner and Dr. Lynn Kitai. I mean, I was just women. And I went from there to Seabridge, Florida, and had a balance of men and women. And then I went to the next conference I had was in Chicago, and it was a balance of men and women. In other words, people like Jen Stein and, there's Nancy Talbot, who's doing amazing work. There's people that don't necessarily get invited to UFO conferences, women that are just incredible women that are part of the balance that should be in ufology. And some of the balance would be to get off the picture of the gray that's stamped everywhere. I mean, even in my Facebook, if they want to be friends and their picture is of a gray, I go, well, is that all you think there is? That really limits the universe. It has become the icon. So you think that a businessman who is wanting to, we're at the Marriott Hotel, and a businessman that might want to come in to look at UFOs and see some kind of statue of a gray alien wants to come in. We've got to make it an educational situation so that even the business people, the people of everyday life, are not looking at us as a bunch of crazy fanatics. I want them to think, hey, this is real. I mean, whether you want to look at it as a matter of flight and pilot, a matter of national security, with, like it was at the Citizen hearing where they were all military men from South America and Europe. These people are scared to death because they've had near misses, UFO misses with their either commercial or their military planes. That isn't anything to laugh at. But when you put just an image of a gray alien, an abduction image, nobody is going to take us seriously.
Especially the way that the grays are memorialized now. You see them on skateboards. You see them glow-in-the-dark stickers that are on bumper stickers even. You just see them everywhere, and you're right. If they're put on in that way, it looks like a kid's toy, and it really looks like Hollywood. And you're right. Who's going to take it seriously when that's all you see? And just, you made a very good point. If you only look at the grays, you're really limiting our universe. And if Clifford Stone said that we've had 58 different species or 57 different species cataloged 26 years ago, obviously if the grays are just one or a couple of them, because I heard there are variations of them, well, what about the other 50 plus species? Clearly they're not all grays. And we spoke about these human looking extraterrestrials. Obviously other people talk